Morning, guys. What are we doing today? My name is Dan. I'm the Jazz Shepherd, as I'm sure most of you know at this point. Trying to spread the channel a little bit out and find some new people. So we're doing these 2 album reviews. One that's really fairly well known, and one that's going to be more obscure. So it's a little bit of something for both beginners to jazz and people who've been around the music for years. Hopefully we'll get something from the rarer review. Bit of a chilly day here in Minnesota. High of like 51 today. For you Europeans, that's like 8 Celsius. Like, it's not by any means a warm day. Got the Out to Lunch shirt on. And that's, of course, one of the records we're going to talk about today. A record I love dearly, but a record that I think is overinflated in terms of its place as one of the great records of this era. And I will explain to you why I say that. I couldn't play this in the car with my wife. I couldn't play this DJing a set somewhere and not expect to have to be able to walk out or be like, it's not to say it's not great. It's just a beer or a wine that's not going to be for everybody. It's edgy, it's intense, it's some brilliant composition, some brilliant playing. It's a musician's record for sure. If you like edgy soundscapes, squeaking and squonking, he's definitely as big an influence on that sound in the music as anybody. As much as Coltrane, as much as Mingus. This song, Hat and Beard, is a tribute to Monk. And so they're displaying some of that janky rhythmic blocking as they move along. It's almost a bit of how the trap rappers rap today. Monk's chordal blockage at times, that kind of that's kind of funny. I haven't realized that before, but it is. There's a lot of that kind of rhythmic cadence to a lot of the trap vocal rapping that comes kind of from that Monk choppiness a little bit. Interesting. But again, I think there's a real big difference between what we like and what is great. And I think for a lot of people in the vinyl community and just in general in life, I like it. It's great. And those two things shouldn't be synonymous. There's got to be some room for individual interpretation and saying that I love this, but it might not be for everybody. And I think that's an important step to take. And if you don't plan on reviewing food, music, beer, wine, you don't need to make that leap. But if you are going to be reviewing this stuff for other people's consumption, you need to be objective. And is this one of the great alternative Blue Note records? Yeah. Is it the greatest Blue Note record in the Blue Note catalog? No. Is it even the top 10 of the great Blue Note record? Probably not. It's not going to be for everybody. It's going to be for a very limited selection of the population. And for me, nothing that you can't play for a room full of people and have the majority of them enjoy can be considered one of the greatest things ever. I just think we got to be more honest about it. You know, it's a great niche product that people who like extreme whatever will love. And that's exactly what it is. Just doing a little research for this episode, just read a few little quick things. And sometimes I think there's an echo chamber. And what I've kind of realized it is, having now a YouTube channel for nigh on 2 years, and doing the Facebook groups for probably 4 years now, Jazz Vinyl Club, JVC, and the Blue Note Jazz group. I have a big Blue Note group on Facebook as well. What I'm really starting to realize is that everyone who's reviewing jazz, everyone who's showing the records they got, everyone who's talking about this is great, you need to have it, there's a common thread going through almost all of it. And it's something I've tried to balk and be different about, almost subconsciously. But now that I've kind of looked at it and thought about it for a second, I understand why there's such an echo chamber. No one wants to make a video showing off a record that anybody can get for $5. No one's reviewing records that are easy to find for $12. And this is great. They want to show you that elusive piece that costs a lot, and they found a nice condition, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But what we end up getting is nothing but rare, expensive records being reviewed, and so no love is being shown on the stuff that actually sold well. The body of the work is all being fleshed over because I don't want to review that. Anybody can get that. What's special about that? Well, it could be a lot special about it. I need to review this. It cost me $120. No one's going to have it. And everyone's going to think, wow, I need to have that. How cool is that? And I get it. I have a channel. I want to review stuff that people are going to find cool and interesting and a bit of wow factor. But I'm also willing to do Count Basie Small Group 7 on Impulse. Because that record's amazing. And you can get it for $5. And I think that's actually what's happened to today's jazz consumer. Is that no one is writing about, reviewing, talking about the common body of jazz. There's nothing celebratory about finding a Hank Crawford record on Atlantic for $8. No one's going to be excited about me showing you an OJC or Red Garland. And that's because we're so focused on pressings. Not what the music makes me feel, not the history of the culture, not any of the aspects of what really matters. It's the tangible item that we're so hung up on. And I think that's why we have such an echo chamber, why so many people want and are searching for the same records and think that these are all the most brilliant records in the music and are really ignoring 90% of the music. And it's how Sun Ra and Cecil Taylor and Pharoah Sanders and all these artists have such a huge draw today compared to when they were around. It's because they didn't sell well. So yeah, Cecil Taylor, Structure is going to be a rare record. It's not for everybody. But because every collector who has a channel wants to show it to you when they find it, they're like, here's my Structures. And 1,000 people leave that going, oh shoot, I need to find Structures. And then they'll pass up Johnny Hodges. They'll pass up Coleman Hawkins. They'll pass up Lester Young. They'll pass up Dizzy Gillespie. Because they want that shit that reviewer on YouTube talked about. It was so cool. And here's one for only $160. I need this. And they could take that $160 and buy 10 great jazz records. But there's a cliche, chic value to finding those rare, obscure titles so you can show them off on your YouTube page, show them off on your Facebook group, and be like, look what I got. And it ends up to a lot of the same records being constantly promoted and endorsed, and it's limited the scope of what jazz is so dramatically. And I'll make no bones about what I review. I'm reviewing the music. I don't even talk about the pressings, and it's not important. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. An archaeologist can glean more from a pottery shard than a collector can from owning a mint vase. That vase is on his shelf. It's in beautiful condition. It's priceless. But he has no understanding of the culture, the history of the people, and it's worthless, in a sense, being in that home. The archaeologist who finds a shard on a tell somewhere in the Mideast, that piece of pottery, the layer it was in, the strata, the etching, the pigment, he's like, oh my God, this has to be from the 2nd century, and they had a context to it, and it's esteemed. And I think we can buy records that aren't in perfect condition or aren't first pressings and learn everything there is to learn about the record and keep our money for other records or taking our wife out to dinner. So I just think that watching some other channels a little bit, just skipping through, Milt Jackson's good. See what I'm saying? Milt Jackson's good. And we have this world of collectors that are buying Miles Davis and Blue Note. And, Impulse is cool too because Coltrane was over there. And they don't really, there's no one marketing or promoting or pushing. The industry's not promoting most of that stuff. They're promoting Miles and Monk, stuff that was on Columbia. They're promoting the titles that will still sell, Stan Getz. And so it's up to the vinyl community itself to be selling and promoting great records. But because they didn't cost a lot, I can't really do that. And so we're left with the small niche of the history of jazz that's being reviewed and promoted and suggested and commented on incessantly. And 90% of the work that's out there affordably and is equal to, if not better than, this record is outstanding, but it's not for everybody. That being said, let's dig in a little bit. It is a great record. It's a great record for musicians. The cosmic struggle between Dolphy's outer space and Freddie Hubbard's inner space is the magic in this record. Richard Davis is great on the bass. Bobby Hutcherson adds a lot of great shading on the vibraphone. A young Tony Williams who had just turned 18 and still referred to as Anthony Williams in his youthfulness. Laid down great punctuated rhythmic tracks that Monk and Mingus and Ellington would be proud of. But it's Hubbard and Dolphy having a battle with their lightsabers over light and in and darkness and out. And you need that struggle at times, that cosmic magnetism of energy from one pole versus the other pole, and it creates a magnetic, powerful force. Coltrane and Miles had it. John Lennon and Paul McCartney have it. It's one of those things that's just very key to next level jazz. This comes out in 1964, towards the end of Dolphy's life and career. He's mostly on prestige new jazz up until this point. He's done some work, of course, with Coltrane in 61, 62, and ultimately I think he's a huge impact on Coltrane and Coleman and everybody else. You know, I feel like there's no one that's kind of doing this more naturally than what Dolphy does. It doesn't feel like it's thought out. It just feels like it's a natural extension of where his soul is taking him. It feels very spiritual from Dolphy, very genuine. You know, there's some out music that to me sounds very constructed, very manipulated with that thought in mind. This feels far more organic. And of course, you have Hubbard and even Hutcherson at times adding color and vibe and warmth to the dark, stark tonescapes that Dolphy's throwing out there. Hutcherson and Richard Davis here have a wonderful little interlude. There's some great bass clarinet from Dolphy on this. He's, of course, a great multi-instrumentalist and plays in a lot of instruments, all with the same kind of dissonance. Again, all quite naturally, which is very impressive. Track 2 on this record, which we'll listen to, is Something Sweet and Something Tender, and it's fantastic. Gazzaloni is right here, and this is actually probably one of the more straightforward numbers on the record, but even still, Hutcherson and Dolphy there are doing some edged out stuff. I think there's flute here from Dolphy, and that's the flute. See how he found those edgy angles? Him and Hutch are kind of smashed in those little splashes of color. And the groove is kind of straightforward, but there's certainly a little danger in the air. And again, of course, any film reviewer can tell you, music, dissonance, edge creates conflict, creates tension, creates an atmosphere and a mood, and helps us to feel what the director of the film wants us to feel at this moment. You take score away from most films, and our emotional connection with what's happening is greatly diminished. And so that same applies to especially instrumental music like jazz. It's meant to be giving us a landscape for where this battle is taking place. Where is this session taking place? And again, this is probably one of the more accessible tracks on the record. And Dolphy's pushing the flute to the edge of what the flute can do. And Herbie Mann and Sam Mose and some of the other great flute players, I don't think ever quite envisioned the flute sounding with some of that dissonant edges of the wounded bird that Eric Dolphy is at this point. We're going to go to side 2 with the title track, a great piece. It's a long number. Again, Hubbard shines, Dolphy shines. But even that, Monk and Mingus are right in step with that, you know. And so again, I want to drive home something. I love this. It's not the same as saying this is one of the greatest things ever. And I think we need to be very clear with our audiences, because I can't say this in 1,000 different ways any more than I've tried. If someone new to jazz goes, oh, this is supposed to be one of the best jazz records ever, 8 out of 10 people are going to be like, I'm done with jazz. This is not beginner stuff. This is stuff for a guy who likes a film that keeps you on the edge of your seat a lot. And some people like rom-coms. Some people like drama. Some people like action. And we need to be more finite with how we define something. Everybody who out there going, oh, it's one of the greatest records ever, everybody needs to have this, and you're just reading the same syrup that everybody else is serving. Let's be a little bit more objective in how we place these things. The jazz review community has got to be one of the most sterile, lifeless bodies of water. It's just the same shit for 30 years, repeating what the last few living legend critics said, and it's just a modern rehashing of the same albums over and over and over, and there's nothing new being presented. We'll have this record reviewed 17 times this year on a few YouTube channels and a couple magazines, and no one will touch Milt Jackson. So, again, I love it. I think it's absolutely wonderful. I wouldn't play it for most people at a gig, and I certainly wouldn't subject my wife to it in the car. She would be most unhappy with me. And that has merit, that has value, people. Accessibility needs to be factored in to an overall rating of anything. This is a great beer, but only 10% of the people in the world are going to like this because it's very, very hoppy. We need that. If you don't like hoppy bitter beer, I don't want to buy this one. Just saying, this is one of the greatest jazz records ever. It's going to make a lot of people go, oh, that's what jazz is? That's the best jazz is? And maybe if they heard Grant Green Idle Moments first, they'd be like, oh, I like this stuff. Maybe if they heard of some bassy blues first, they'd go, I like this music. Some Ellington and Coltrane, they're like, oh, you know, yeah, Little Brown Book, I like this. Illinois Jacquette, maybe some Johnny Hartman. Let's make those records seem as important, and they are as important as this. It's insane to me watching such a small part of jazz, and that's part of the issue. Everybody wants to show the records that are expensive and super collectible and rare, but they're in for the most part, they're rare because they didn't sell, because they weren't for everybody. Imagine if beer would have disappeared from the face of the world. And in 100 years from now, everybody who's talking about beer and writing review beer about what beer used to be great, and beer's not really around anymore. There's a few people trying to make it, but imperial stouts and triple barley wines and hoppy IPAs, that's the greatest beers in the world. And everyone forgets about Budweiser, Heineken, Miller, Beck's, Bass Ale, Newcastle. We forget about all the body of beer. And we just are saying, oh, this extreme, really rare shit that few people liked, that's the best beer ever. That's what beer is. How many people would come to beer and for their first sip try a barley wine or an imperial stout and be like, oh, I never want to drink beer again? Well, we should have started them off with a nice Pilsner. It doesn't even have to be a mainstream bad Pilsner. It can be a nice Pilsner from a good brewery. A nice amber lager. Even Sam Adams. I haven't had one in a couple of years, but 10 years ago, Sam Adams was a great lager. A nice malty amber body. A nice clean dry finish. That was the beer that really turned me on to loving beer. Let's find some middle of the ground approach to how we review and try to inspire people to love this music. And that's ultimately the point here, is we're trying to get people to love jazz. We're not trying to drive everybody away except for the real hippest snobs who get Archie Sheppard on the album. Oh, if you don't like this, we don't want you. No, we do. We want everybody to recognize that jazz is such a big body of work that anybody can find something they love. And that's ultimately why I say a lot of things I say. I'm trying to make jazz more accessible for the average layman, the average lay woman. We need more female listeners in jazz. And I'll tell you one thing, they're far more likely to like this than this, as great as this is. Kenny Clarke, one of the great innovative drummers in the history of the music. He comes along with Max Roach and Art Blakey in the 40s after the war, and then all three of them kind of reshaped drumming. And his riding of the ride cymbal is notorious and changed the face of how we hear drums and jazz. He, Blakey, and Roach pretty much dominate the bebop into hard bop moment. They're on all seminal recordings pretty much. Kenny Clarke has a fairly varied history, from working with John Lewis and the MJQ to working with Frosty Boland and spending years in Europe with that great group with some Europeans and some transplanted Americans. He's a huge part of Savoy, late 40s, early 50s, into the mid 50s. And he's playing and backing up most of the great Savoy records in that era, has Kenny Clarke on the drums. And his early LPs in the 55, 56 are outstanding. Klug's Clique, Hank Jones, all that stuff is great. But this is a 10-inch, comes out in 1954-55, 15051. And if you want the LP version of this, it's side A, I believe, of the Telefunken Blues LP, which is number 12,008 or 12,006. A very early Savoy 12-inch LP is this reissue with another Kenny Clarke 10-inch. But the side that's important to me, the other side's good, it was with Basie's guys. But this side two, or side one, this 10-inch is mostly with West Coast cats. And it's got a couple very important musicians. There's Milt Jackson, who he played with in the MJQ briefly. And Milt's one of the great bluesy, gutsy players in the history of this music. Milt's an absolute giant. His body of work is outstanding. His stuff with the MJQ gives you one kind of dimension, but then he has this whole other dimension of blues, hard-driven records at Atlantic, at Blue Note, at Riverside, that are just amazing. And he's really quite a virtuoso within the blues. It's never going beyond what my story demands. I'm not going to add all kinds of flurries that don't belong in my narrative. He's one of those storytelling guys, but it's Outstanding stuff. And on the saxophone there, we have Walter Benson from the West Coast, who was a guy who made a few records here and there, a couple on Riverside Jazzland. And it's kind of a spotty recording career for Walter Benson. But the real star of this record, and I've talked about it before, I believe in my jazz journal, was the great, oh my God, drawing a blank right now, Frank Morgan. Frank Morgan was a Minneapolis-born, Milwaukee-raised alto player who was very much in the school of Parker and Bit Dizzy, and was playing with them some on the West Coast when Parker was out there. Frank Morgan's kind of finding his way. He ends up getting a great record on the GNP label, Gene Norman Presents, that's gives you the full breadth of his ability. But Gerald Wiggins on the piano and Frank Morgan, Percy Heath is on the bass. But Morgan and Benton are a nice little sax section on this. And Morgan shows you some incredible dexterity, incredible bebopism. You know, he's heralded as the successor to Parker when Parker passes, and instead he gets a bad drug habit, ends up most of the 50s, 60s, into the 70s in jail. Continuously arrested, never really cleaned his act up until the 80s, where he makes a few comeback records that are actually really outstanding on contemporary. But Morgan's little bit of recorded work in 54, 55, it's really noteworthy. And if you see something that has Frank Morgan from 54, 55, you should grab it before it kind of disappears for 30 years. It's a pained young guy. And he admits later on down the road that the pressure of putting on the Charlie Parker mantle was too great for him. You know, Parker was so esteemed and so revered by everybody in the jazz kingdom. And to be a young kid suddenly saying, you know, that throne's yours if you want it, he abdicated. He's like, nah, this isn't going to be my desk. I can't. I don't have... It's enough to shake anybody's confidence, really. No matter how great or confident you are. Michael Jordan goes down, you're like, yeah, you're going to be the next Mike. Bring us the title. GNP had big hopes for him, and instead it just drove him mad, basically. But Clarke's fantastic. This is a great 10-inch. And again, it's on Telefunken Blues if you want the 12-inch version, which is probably easier to find and a little bit more affordable, the Telefunken Blues. It's got some Japanese reissues. It's got several different covers, so you gotta be careful with that. But Kenny Clarke, Savoy, golden stuff. Definitely worth the digging and trying to find this. The original cover, it's that Savoy black and white, you know, look. I was thrilled when I found this, and it plays pretty wonderfully, you know. It really sounds fantastic. So, Frank Morgan and Kenny Clarke, 10-inch, definitely great stuff. And for the most part, it's stuff like this that non-jazz heads aren't going to be objecting to. I could play this right here at a gig, and at the worst, you can ignore it and eat your dinner. At the best, you can tap your foot to this and be like, oh, that's kind of swinging. I like that. Swing. Smiles. We don't want this. We want people loving it. There's so much jazz that is lovable. Let's stop just paying attention to the shit that bites back. Or else the shit's gonna go extinct. You know what I mean? It is gonna die out if we don't recognize and value and treasure the records that don't cost $100. And I get everybody wants to show that rare record they found. You know, you have 12 records here. What am I going to show? I'm going to show you the rarest one that cost me the most. I get it. But I think it's created a real echo. And we're seeing the same record shown. And it's... Like I said, I got 13,000 records. We don't judge a record by how rare it is or how expensive it is. We judge a record by how does it make me feel and how do I respond to it, react to it. And there's room for both, guys. So find your Kenny Clarks, dig them and value them. And of course, if you like the Out to Lunch is one of the great records in that sound ever. Dolphy's as innovative and as brilliant as anybody in this music ever has been. And he certainly helped change the landscape dramatically. So in no way am I denigrating that album. I love it. But I'm also saying to you, if you don't like really hoppy bitter beer, you don't want to even try this one. Move on to some Pilsners. Come back to this. Come back to it. Y'all be safe. Talk to you soon. Peace.